Good evening, everyone. This is Reverend Pat Reeves.
And good evening. This is Keisha, Keiwear, Mayo.
We'd like to welcome everyone to another week of 15 Minutes of Fame.
Fame meaning faith and ministerial empowerment.
That's right, because as the scripture says in Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, one person can certainly sharpen another. God bless you, everyone. Welcome to 15 Minutes of Fame's special session tonight. It's Real Talk with Reeves and Mayo, and the title of the session tonight is Did You Know? And tonight we're going to tap the surface and discuss and explore a renowned, he was celebrated, very controversial, powerful, and a very popular male religious figure from the past. And we're going to be doing this from time to time. Now, the religious figure for this week that we are going to discuss is called Father Divine. That's his name. Now, before we get started, anyone on the has anyone on the line ever heard of Father Divine before, prior to tonight?
Yep.
Somebody said, "Yep." Okay, was that you, MC? That said, "Yep." Somebody said, "Yep."
That sounds like
Gwen.
That was you, Gwen?
Yeah.
Okay, darling. Okay, Gwen said she'd heard about him. Okay, so we're going to talk tonight about Father Divine. Now, we're going to get started with this. Hopefully, some of you are able to either Google some information about him, and some of us had a small video to watch just to give us an idea of who he was, what he stood for, etc. Now, one thing I will say about Father Divine is there are some positives and there are some negatives, okay, as it relates to who he was. He was, and this is my own personal expression, he had to be he was one of the most successful, he was a religious leader. He was a civil rights activist. He was also a very wealthy businessman. Very wealthy businessman. And he was loved by many. He was disliked by many. And I'm sure he had a lot of haters. Now, although his name is Father Divine, he was not a Catholic priest. And he wasn't affiliated in any way or another with the Catholic Church. He had no dealings with the Catholic Church. Now, he was born. I'm trying to get so many different historical accounts say he was born in 1876, around that time. Some said he was born later. Some say that he might have been the son of ex-slaves. Okay. And other historical reports says that Father Divine was born in Rockville, Maryland, and then there were reports that said he was born in Atlanta. Well, he was born, okay? That's all I'm going to say. He was born, okay? And let me ask this question to you all while we're talking about Father Divine. Does it matter or should it matter? Should a title or the name of a leader matter? Anyone, you can answer that question. Yes or no? Should it matter what a person's name is or what their title is? Would you have a problem with somebody saying that they're the grand poobah of the XYZ church?
I wouldn't have a problem with it. They could believe what they want to believe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you want to call yourself that, go right on ahead.
All right. Kiki's like, you call yourself what you want. You grown. You said you don't. What did you say, Gwen? Problem. You don't have a problem.
As far as the titles are, if you're going to call yourself that, be what it is you say that you are, in my humble opinion. Or don't have no title. Thank you.
I know that's right. Okay, what is right? You have to. Okay, I'm the grand poobah. Okay, what is a grand poobah? Then you have to explain it. I totally, I totally understand that. Now, let's start with some of the positives about Father Divine. What did you hear about Father Divine, Prophetess Gwen? What did you hear about him? You said you heard of him.
I just heard his name. I don't know too much about what he did or anything.
Oh, okay, okay. So you heard his name, so that means he was being talked about. Okay, Sister
Yeah.
Maria, you said you did a little Googling. What did you perceive? What did you find out about him? Where do you begin, right?
Right. I found out that his followers believed that he was the second coming of Christ.
Mhm.
His followers were required to commit to a celibate lifestyle, abstinence from immoral actions.
Mhm.
Uh-oh, that's my phone. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's correct. That's correct. And his movement, it wasn't really a church. It was called the International Peace Missions Movement. It wasn't really called a church, although he was a preacher, and they did have religious services. When I say religious services, they would have scripture reading, they would sing, and then he would speak. He was very much into prosperity and also positive thinking. One thing Father Divine did not preach is he didn't preach about hell or heaven. And if he did, his thing was you can have it right here on earth. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can have it right here on earth. He didn't believe about all of that afterlife type of stuff. And as Sister Maria said, his followers had to adhere to a very strict moral code, okay? He taught them, I call it holiness with a twist. Okay? Or holiness on another level or at another dimension, because the thing was this: he did not preach getting married. But he had a wife. He had two wives, not at the same time. Okay, his first wife was named Penina, and she was black. His second wife was Caucasian. Now, during that period of time, this was in the 30s, his ministry or his movement, let me put it to you that way, his movement was very, very popular, especially during the Depression era, when people had lost a lot of jobs, when people were hungry, and many people were unemployed. What he did was this. This is one of the positives about him. What he did was this. He decided, and I think in his mind, what he wanted to do, being that he didn't preach about, going into a heaven after this, his thing was you can have heaven on earth. And I believe he tried to paint that kind of a picture or have that kind of an organization with his followers. Because what happened is anyone who wanted to follow them or become a follower of the peace movement, he would have you move into what he called a heaven. And that was a residence. And you, male or female, and if you had children, they would come too. Everyone would live in the same building, or sometimes they would buy hotels. He had a lot of real estate. They would buy these hotels, and whoever followed, all of the members were free to stay there. And not only that, they stayed in that hotel, and they would stay in different quarters, though. They were not allowed to mingle. They were not allowed to mix. His followers had to adhere to what is called an international modest code. It was international because he became so popular and so famous that not only did he have followers in the United States, followers in Harlem, and followers in Pennsylvania, but he also had followers in other countries. Okay, that was one of the positives. Okay, another positive was that he was, before the civil rights movement, what he taught his people is this: you black and white people are people. They're not better than you. You are not better than them. He believed in economic equality for males and females. He believed he did not agree to and he did not believe in desegregation. He believed in integration. And he did a lot of things to prove that people did not like and did not approve of. Okay, Father Divine and his wife, they moved to Brooklyn. They set up in Brooklyn. And then from Brooklyn, they went to Harlem. Oh, pardon me. They went to Long Island. He moved during that period of time. He had so much money, and his organization had so much money. Him and his wife, they moved the organization. When I say organization, people lived with them. They moved the organization to Sayville, New York, which is Long Island, to an all-white neighborhood. And what he would do is this. He would feed all of his followers who stayed in the same residence, who stayed in the same building, or stayed in the same hotel. He would feed you, and you wouldn't have to pay. Now, there are some historical records that said he used to charge them maybe during that time 25 cents for each meal and $1 a week to stay there. That's what some historical accounts say. And what he would do is this. He would have the most elaborate and luxurious, when I say elaborate, dinners and feasts, I mean on fine china for hundreds of people, because he believed in fellowship. He believed in fellowshipping. He wanted them to come. Like I said, I think in his mind, his ideology was he didn't preach heaven, going to heaven after you die. We can have it here. This is what heaven is supposed to look like. There's supposed to be black and white people mixing. There's supposed to be integration. And his followers, like Sister Maria said, they could not smoke, they could not drink, they could not curse, they couldn't even exchange gifts or presents. He didn't, and now this could be looked at as a negative, and this is one of the reasons also why the peace movement was looked upon as a cult, and he was looked upon as a cult a religious cult leader, is because he did not preach marriage, although he was married twice. He preached against sexual intercourse. So the people who lived, he didn't have any children. And he claimed that the women that he married, they had a sexless marriage. It was only symbolic. This is where things start deviating at this point. Okay, that's why it's called a cult, because he wanted them to follow all of his rules. Okay, a cult is a group that is being led by the term cult itself is a group that is led by a charismatic and a self-appointed leader who excessively controls its members, requiring unwavering devotion to a set of beliefs and practices which are considered deviant and outside of the norm. His entire organization or his peace movement was considered unorthodox. He was considered unorthodox, meaning he was not the norm as a preacher. He was not the norm because of the things that they were doing. Now, granted, during the Depression era, like I said, his organization, and this is a black man in Harlem, he had more real estate than anyone else in Harlem at that time. He was one of the wealthiest black men in Harlem. His organization had accumulated. Now, granted, another thing that his followers did, too, was they took all of their savings and they gave it to him, and they all lived off of it. He taught them against having life insurance, and he also taught them against acquiring any debt. Now, I think that right there is a positive. Okay? Right. He didn't want them to have any debt. So I'm assuming if anyone passed...
Was Father Divine over that church right there?
No, that's somebody else. I know who you're talking about. The one that had all that good food in it?
Yeah.
No, that's a different one. We're going to talk about him, too, probably next week.
Because I used to hear about the name Father
What's
Divine.
his name, Daddy?
His name is Sweet Daddy.
No.
Sweet
no,
Daddy
Daddy
Gray.
Gray. Daddy Gray.
Yes, that's that's another one. We're gonna probably touch on him
a whole different daddy.
Yes, right. What you say? That's right. It sure is. Yes, it is. It sure is a whole different one. It sure is. So yeah. So Father Divine did not preach marriage, and whoever lived there, if a couple came there and they were married, they couldn't sleep. They couldn't stay together. They had to sleep in different quarters. She had to sleep with the women. He had to sleep with the men. That's how it was. When I say sleep with them, not do anything with them, but as far as resting at night, he couldn't. They didn't allow mixing of the sexes. This was his international modest code. This is one of the reasons why his followers were looked at as a cult. But again, during the Depression, they didn't have to worry about food. What he did also, which was very positive, is he created businesses. Father Divine had gas stations. They had grocery stores. They had restaurants. He had bought up hotels. And the people who resided, again, all of his followers who lived under the same roof, they were being employed. They had jobs. They could work. They worked for the organization. So they didn't have to worry about anything but just living. Now, granted, when he did get married after his first wife died, now, believe it or not, he didn't tell his organization. I don't think they had a funeral for her. He just, I think, stopped talking about her. Keisha's like, listen, I'm telling you, this is what the historical records say, hon. This is what the historical records say. And when he married the Caucasian woman, she was young. She was his stenographer. He was so charismatic. Now, granted, can I tell you how tall he was? Anyone want to take a guess? MC? That would have been wonderful. No. You want to take a guess, MC?
Was he like Gary Coleman?
No, boy, wasn't that short. Father Divine was only 5 feet tall.
Yeah. Wow.
Some records say he was 5'2", and that meant he had a great deal of power. Okay? Now, when he did marry his second wife, he did it without telling the congregation. We've probably heard some things like this happen in life still. He didn't say anything to them. Now, granted, he was not racist, and they preached against racism and all of that. They preached against prejudice and racism because he believed in equality. He believed that white people and black people were equal to one another. No one is better than the other, okay? And they're all on the same equal footing. He believed in economic equality. He believed that if they had money, then black people should have money. If white people had businesses, then black people should have businesses. He was a huge capitalist. He believed in business. He believed in making money. Again, he was considered as a prosperity preacher. Any questions? Anyone want to add anything? Okay. So his followers had to adhere to his codes. If they didn't, they might have been dismissed. Now, there was one. He had a lot of haters, and he was also arrested. This blew my mind. The reason he was arrested was because when he was living in Long Island, he used to have these big gatherings. All his followers used to come over, and they loved eating and all of that type of stuff. And his neighbors, again, he was in an all-white neighborhood. Now, this is back in the days of segregation, y'all. I'm talking about like the 30s, the 1930s, when black people not really supposed to have nothing. You're supposed to be poor. During the Depression era, okay, he had millions. His organization was worth $15 million at the end of the Depression. A black man in Harlem. $15 million the International Peace Mission had in assets. Okay? So he had a gathering at his house in Long Island in the all-white neighborhood, and the neighbors, it bothered them, so they called the cops on him. And the cops came, busted up the party. They really did not have, and doesn't that sound familiar today, kind of, sort of? They really did not have a just reason. They had Karens back then. Lord have mercy. They didn't have a just reason other than they're making too much noise. They're disturbing the peace. So what happened is about several of his followers had gotten arrested, okay? And he was arrested too. And what happened is he bailed all of them out because the bail was only $5 a piece. Now, y'all know we talking about the early days. He gave the officer $500. This is all documented. And they couldn't even give him change back.
Wow.
That's how he was balling. Okay? He was balling. He gave them a $500 bill to get all the people that got arrested out, and they couldn't give him back change. Not that they didn't want to, they didn't have it. He had a lot of haters. Yeah, I know. I was like, there's a $500 bill. I know there's a $100 bill, but that he was balling. Okay, he was a fancy. He dressed nice, and he was very nice to people. And I kept saying to myself, okay, I understand him being nice, and I mean, you know, you get to people through food. They tell a woman, you know, you want to get to men, get to them through food. I think you get to people through food too. Now, this is on one occasion, this is what the menu was, Saints: pig feet, pig ears, buttered cauliflower, spinach, sweet potatoes, string beans. This is what was on the menu. One of the menus. I looked that up too. This all you didn't have to pay a dime. Just come and sit and enjoy. But you had to also dress modest. Now, another thing, the women were not allowed to wear pants. They couldn't wear short skirts. And men could not wear short sleeves. He didn't want no muscles showing. And every time you saw him, even if you Google him, Father Divine, you'll see how he was dressed. Looked like he had a three-piece suit on every time and a hat. I mean, he was dressed to the nines all the time. These are some positive things. But again, the negative things is this. You can't get married. He didn't teach them getting married. And, of course, was wrong. Even with, you know, even if it was with someone you got married to. No one was allowed. They didn't drink. That all of that's good. Like I said, it's holiness with a twist. He wanted them to live right. He didn't want them to drink. He wanted them to stay out of debt. You know, he didn't want them to get caught up with bribes and in money schemes. But then he controlled them. And when I say thousands of people, he was so convincing that white people even started following him. He had a large following in California, a very large following in California. They started following him. Okay? That's how charismatic he was. He had hotels, homes, clothing, and food stores. And he taught all of his followers to pay off your debts and to avoid credit purchases and insurance. Now, that insurance piece, I don't know. Got to have some insurance, Pops. Okay? Want to be able to bury. But like I said, if they died, he probably more than likely buried them. So what happened is the peace mission was very successful up until like the 50s. In the 1950s, that's when things started slowing down. That was after, you know, the Depression was over. Things started slowing down at that point, and then his health started to decline. Now, he passed away in 1965, and his wife, they bought when I tell y'all after this, if anyone who wants me to send you a picture of the home that he bought, and this is where some of his faithful followers who are still following him live now, I can send it to you. Just let me know, and I'll send it to you on Facebook. When I say the place is gorgeous, oh my, I mean, it is fabulous. Until today, they still have dinners, but he doesn't have as many followers as he used to have. And again, he taught them positive thinking. Now, I got a few more minutes, then y'all can have comments. You wouldn't believe two things I want to bring out here. Two things. Number one, believe it or not, Father Divine went to the Azusa Street revival. And according to history, he got filled with the Holy Ghost and was speaking in tongues. That's where the Pentecostal movement is said to have started, on Azusa Street. He was there. Now, he was so successful, there was one other cult leader who studied him and even took it upon himself to start utilizing some of his practices. Does anyone know who that might have been? Or want to take a guess? Major cult leader. Say that again?
Jim Jones. Somebody said Jim Jones.
That's right. That's who it was. Jim Jones. Jim Jones, I wouldn't say he was jealous of him, but he was fascinated with him because his thing was, how is it that you have so many people following you and look at what you're doing? This is how you're getting people. This is how you're getting control. And so what happened is after he died, his wife was left, and she carried on the International Peace Mission. And up until 2017, she still lived in that. I mean, this house is humongous, and it's in, I believe it's Gwyneth. I think it's Glenwine. It's in Glenwine, Pennsylvania, and it's a tourist attraction now. People can go there to see it, but you have to dress appropriately. Women can't wear pants, and you got to dress appropriately. But it's a tourist attraction, and some of his faithful followers who've been following him for decades are still living there, still eating off of fine china. And I mean, his banquets were elaborate. I mean, you would think it was a convention. Free food, fine china, fine sterling, nothing but the best. And that's probably one of the things that I would say might have drawn so many people because, again, it was during the Depression. And here's a black man. He was for his people. He wasn't prejudiced, but one thing they can say about him is he believed, he wanted what was best for his black people. He was also an activist, okay? Him and his people signed protests for anti-lynching laws because black people was being lynched back then during that time in certain areas, certain states. So he was very active. But when it came to preaching, I Googled, did he use the scriptures? He might have, but this is where he went off at. They started worshiping him. When I say worshiping him, I'm not going to say they got on their knees, but they started saying that he was God because of how much he had blessed them, how much he had given them. That's what they started saying. And he even declared, I have it here, the year, I'll have to look for it though, that he started saying that he was the incarnation of God. Now, anyone want to comment? Anybody want to comment after that or on that? Or if you saw the video, if you want to comment about anything you saw in the video, or if you Googled anything else and you want to talk about it, you can. My thing is, one of the many parts is him telling his followers that you can't get married. Okay, he taught there's no heaven after, there's no heaven or hell to go to. Everything is here. Enjoy your life, enjoy yourself. Don't smoke, don't drink. It's like it was like a movement of works. You know what I'm trying to say? And the Bible says, by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourself. It is a gift of God, lest any man could, not of works, lest any man could boast. So he preached a lot of positive thinking. Think positive. Accentuate the positive. That saying might have come from him. Accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. He taught his people that. They believed that.
He inspired that song.
He did. Isn't that something? Because that's a song. So what do y'all think now about Father Divine and his followers? I mean, living all under the same roof, free food, free fun. You just can't mix. You can't buy nobody presents. You can't buy the opposite sex gifts. You can't have you can't have no kind of intercourse, legal or illegal. And his marriage to both women were sexless marriages. He said they were symbolic because God didn't have a wife. So God didn't get, what did he say? God didn't get married, or God didn't get married, or something like that, or have sex, or something like that. So his thing is he's not going to do that either. People didn't believe him, but his first wife, said their marriage was symbolic. They loved each other, and his second wife too. And she was very young. She was, I believe, in her 20s when she married him, a Caucasian woman. So it just goes to show you I'm still trying to figure out how so many people followed him. I don't know. Maybe I would have had to be living back in those days, not so much to follow him. But I see the positive, but then you see the negative. I'm sorry, but what he wanted and what they did to him was the same thing Roman emperors wanted. And the Christians was like, no, there's only one God. I'm not bowing down to you. I'm not bowing down to Caesar. I'm not bowing down to none of the Roman emperors. And the Christians, many of them were martyred. They were killed. So here it is. We're talking tonight about Father Divine. He was very powerful. He was very rich. He was very wealthy. He was a positive thinker. Okay, he wanted his people to live holy. He wanted them to be moral, with some exceptions. And his wife, Jim Jones, I hollered when I read this, and then we're going to end. Jim Jones tried to take over the movement in the 70s from his wife. He tried to get some of their members from Father Divine. Father Divine had died. And Jim Jones said that he was the reincarnation of Father Divine. And Father Divine's spirit and presence and all of that stuff was upon him, and that they should follow him. His wife wasn't going for it. It didn't work. So we know what happened. What happened is Jim Jones went back to the People's Temple, and he started implementing some of the things that he saw Father Divine doing. Give them food. Give them clothes. That's exactly what he started doing. And we see what happened, right?
Well, they called, ironically, they called his movement a cult.
Jim Jones?
Father Divine's people called his movement, Jim Jones' movement, they called him a cult.
Isn't that something?
As a cult. They definitely saw Jim Jones as a cult.
But that's what they were, because they were being controlled. Now, granted, anytime you're being told you cannot do this, you cannot do that, and everything I say go, I was in one of the videos I was seeing, in one of the residences that they were living in, he had speakers throughout the entire building. So that means at any given time, he can cut, let's say if they were in the basement, he can cut on basement, or he can cut on first floor, and he could talk to everybody at the same time who's on that floor. And then when he finished talking, he just cut it off. It's in one of the videos. After this, if anyone, not tonight, but if you want to continue reading up about him, it's when I say it's incredible, I have never heard of or seen anything or read anything like this in my life about one person and how much power this person could have. I mean, it's a mixture of positive and negative. It's a mixture of good and bad. But anyone who calls themselves God, I'm sorry. That right there, to me, it has to outweigh all the good. Because there's only one God. So there we have it. If anyone wants to comment, feel free to comment. If you have anything to say about Father Divine or about his followers or about some of the things that he did, again, it was a mixture of good and bad because he took care of the black people. He believed in business. He believed in capitalism. He had hotels. He bought hotels, and they had restaurant businesses. They had gas stations. All of this is positive. But when you go home, there's nothing wrong with living with someone. But you're really you're not being who you are. Now, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to end. There was one lady, black woman, two things happened. Of course, anyone with that kind of money, and you're African American, you know the FBI wants to get involved. But the district attorney of Long Island, where he was living in an all-white neighborhood, they sent in a spy. They tried to infiltrate the peace mission. So they had a beautiful young black woman join the peace mission or join his movement so that she can try to seduce him, so that she can try to get him to have, relations with her so that she can go back and report it, and then they can start sending out news reports and papers. He's not who he say he is. He's not this. He's not that. So they can start, saying that he's not honest and he's a fraud. But It didn't work. They welcomed her like they welcomed everybody else, and she even said it. Every time she flirted with him, he paid her no attention. He didn't give her the time of day. It didn't work. Nothing she did, it just didn't work. They couldn't infiltrate the organization. They were very tight. And he must have been living right, other than him saying that he's God. And I'm like, if you would have just, Father, why you had to go and say you God? You know what I'm saying? I mean, he had a lot going for himself. He was black. He was wealthy. He was rich. He had a lot of real estate. He was helping his people. He was preaching integration. He was preaching against lynching. He was preaching against racism. But that one thing right there, his thing was, y'all are married. You know, God is your husband. You don't have to get married. That's what he taught, and many of them believed it. But again, as the 50s started coming in the 1950s, the organization started dwindling, and he got sick, and he passed away in 1965. And on the property that he lived on and that the people at that time lived on with him, he has a mausoleum and a crypt. That's where he's buried, not in a grave or anything. He's buried right on land, and it's a landmark. Where the house that he purchased in Pennsylvania, it's a landmark. So if anyone wants to see it, I can send it to you. I can send you the link to it, and you can see it for yourself. It's absolutely gorgeous. But other than that, him saying that he was God, that's a major problem. And like I say, that outweighs the good. When you saying you God and people are looking up to you like, you know, you are everything, and without you I wouldn't have this, without God we wouldn't have anything. And they didn't even too much like to talk about him being dead, because if you God, you can't die. It's like, you know, what are people thinking? I'm still trying to, like, God, how did they follow him? I mean, I understand you was eating pig ears and pig feet, okay, for free, and spinach and all of that stuff, but their minds had to have been gone to a place where they are actually believing that this man is God, because he gave many of them jobs. They didn't have to worry about anything. Now, lastly, there was one woman, a black lady. She sued him because what she wanted was all of her savings back, and she wanted to leave the organization. And he didn't give it to her. And so she fought because her thing, and she started lying. She started saying that they were having orgies and they was doing all kind of perverse things, men with men. She started all these lies, and they never found any evidence of that. And how about she went right back to the organization after all of that? And I think they accepted her. I don't know what happened after that, but she didn't get her money back. But after lying on him and trying to get him, put in jail, and another thing happened to him as well. I did say he was arrested twice, more than one time. One time he was arrested, and the judge convicted him to 30 days. Again, whenever they arrested him, it was not because he broke a law. It was because either he had too many people following him, or it was a disturbance of the peace, or they didn't like what he was preaching. So the judge that convicted him to 30 days in jail died 2 days afterwards. And he told the people, I hated to do it. You know what, Saints? Yes, he did. He took credit for it. He sure did. He said, I hated. Huh?
Was there any children born in that era with father's advice?
You know what? The historical records don't talk a lot about children. All it says is that men, women, and children were fed. It just talks about how he fed them. So whole families. Say that again?
And children. Somebody was doing something to get children.
Unless they came there with them. Because he wasn't preaching. He didn't preach marriage.
Oh, well.
He was against it, yeah. He said anyone who got here through intercourse, you got here the wrong way. But how are we supposed to get here? So, like I said, it was a lot of things that was twisted. I mean, he had so many positives. I'm like, other than this, it's a major evangelism. When you're saying you are God and people are worshiping you as God, and you're not preaching about a heaven or a hell, the hereafter, you can have what you have now. And I think a lot of people, a lot of preachers, after they studied him and they tried to emulate him. Like I said, Jim Jones wanted to take over the organization, but it didn't work. So he started, implementing some of his practices. And unfortunately, it got to his mind, and he started doing things, and we know what happened in Guyana. One of the worst mass suicides ever, cult suicides.
That was murder.
Yeah, it was murder. But other than, Father Divine looking out for his people and him being an activist, that part right there, them saying you are God. No, that's the only thing. And that's why they said he was very unorthodox, and he was very, very controversial figure, but he was very popular, very known because, after he had gotten arrested, they said, the headlines, people started looking at him, journalists started wanting to talk to him, and sometimes the worse the person is, although he wasn't worse in that aspect, the more publicity that person gets. And we're seeing that right now, and I won't go into it. So, are there any more comments before I turn this over to Sister Keisha? Thank you so much for engaging in this conversation about Father Divine. If anyone wants to say anything about it, what they saw in the video or what you Googled, please feel free to do so before we turn this over to Sister Kiki. All right, Sister Keisha?
All right, we thank everyone who came on the line tonight. We pray you had a good time and you learned something new on tonight. And we just encourage you to come back next week, same time, same line.
Time, same line.
In the 15 minutes of fame.
Amen. God bless you all. Love you. Have a good night.
Love you all. Good night.
God bless you. Good night, darling. Bye-bye.
God bless you. Good night.
Good night.